Shalom, I'm Dr. Dinah Dye with the Hebraic Roots Network. If you enjoy our great lineup of teachers and our excellent programming, please consider donating your financial gifts to the Hebraic Roots Network. You'll be glad you did. Shalom, welcome back to this series of programs on the life of Hezekiah. And I've been laying the groundwork and comparing Hezekiah with the Messiah. My name's Dr. Dinah Dye. I'm with Foundations in Torah, and I hope you'll join me in this study. I encouraged you last time to go back and look at some of the passages, in particular reading in Isaiah 1 through 39, for instance, because you know that a lot in there has to do with the Messiah, and a lot of what's being talked about is in relationship to Hezekiah. We left off last time talking about the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel. I went through the various accession methods to the throne. I would encourage you to go back and listen to that program, but a lot of this information comes from a man named Edward Teal. He wrote a book called The Mysterious Numbers of the Hebrew Kings. And in this particular book, it goes through all the controversies and debates and the chronologies and the numbering between the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel. It's quite complex and maybe a little bit on the academic side, but there's a lot of great information there. So we talked about King Hoshea was the king of Israel and the last king of Israel. And of course, at that point, the Assyrians came and Samaria fell and went off into, the northern tribe went off into captivity. They pretty well fix Samaria, the date of the fall of Samaria at 721, 722 BCE. However, Teal believes it was 723. So we'll kind of go in there with those three years. At the same time that Samaria falls and the northern tribes are taken into captivity, King Ahaz, Hezekiah's father, is on the throne. And he is the one on the throne in Judah when Israel falls. So we're going to talk about Hezekiah here. Interesting character, really bad guy. His name we could translate the strong one. So I hope you can see the relationship there then between the enemy, the strong man. We have parables about the strong man. He began to rule in approximately 735 BCE, and we mentioned last time that Hoshea, the last king of Israel, was ruling in 732. King Ahaz, his main policy was collaboration with his enemy, Assyria. And at the time of Ahaz, we find there are many conflicts going on between Ahaz and all his neighbors, and we'll look at some of those. In reality, Ahaz made Judah a vassal state of Assyria. He was the opposite of Hezekiah in every way, and it gives me hope when I think of how evil King Ahaz was to have actually produced King Hezekiah, who was probably one of the greatest restorers of the faith, bar none. So it can always give us hope of the child that we produce. Again, he was the complete opposite to Hezekiah. He opposed everything. His policies and rules were in opposition to that. He was the one responsible to destroy the temple institution and its services, all the vessels, the furniture, etc. He defiled the central sanctuary and really comes to represent the enemy within the gates. So Ahaz, he's the king of Judah. We know that's the line of the Messiah. And so there is always the reality of an enemy within, and we have to be very cognizant of that. So he's kind of the picture of the enemy setting up the abomination that causes desolation. We will find that in every time frame there is always one who will attempt to set up an abominating influence in the temple, and that certainly was Ahaz. By contrast, when Hezekiah comes to the throne and rules solely on the throne, that is, his father Ahaz dies and they're no longer co-regents, he rebuilds and restores everything. And I believe that's a picture, too, pointing us ahead to the time that Messiah would come and build the fallen sukkah, or the temple. Now, in a spiritual sense, the temple represents the body of the Messiah, or the body of believers, a literal body. And so this body that we see many problems in, when the Messiah returns, he will raise up that fallen sukkah, he will raise up that temple. At this time frame with Ahaz, Assyria is the enemy. And basically, Ahaz sold out to the enemy. And this is the pattern that we see with weak rulers. Rulers that are weak tend to join forces with the enemy. They cozy up and make nice and negotiate with the enemy. In fact, all weak rulers do that. So Ahaz appeals to the king of Assyria to get some coverage and some protection, and pay that bribery, if you will, bribery price. And at the same time, we find Edom is attacking Ahaz, the Philistines are invading, and Pekah comes down from the north. So all of this everything's coming upon Ahaz because, again, he is weak. And so what he does is he joins himself at that time to King Tiglath-Pileser for help. And Tiglath-Pileser, the king of Assyria, is really Ahaz's mortal enemy. So now he allows the enemy, again, to come in and further weaken the empire. So that is the nature of leaders. And interestingly enough, Ahaz's name means strong one or strong man. So this is one who appears strong, but then turns everything around and makes the empire weak. And so we find with Ahaz, the attacks come from every side. He forms very unholy alliances around him. We contrast this with King Hezekiah, who actually has his policies are very anti-Assyrian. He recognizes who his enemy is, and he distances himself from that enemy. Hezekiah, instead of reaching out to Assyria and joining forces with his enemy, reaches out to Egypt at that time and withdraws himself from Assyria. It's at this time that the prophet Isaiah is speaking, and he is the one, in fact, who encourages Hezekiah to resist the Assyrian power. Now, Assyria is the major power of the day, and weak rulers generally want to have that kind of favor. But you get in bed with a ruler like that, and they're going to take you out. There's no way around it. Hezekiah, on the other hand, recognizes the bully that Assyria is, and he pushes back against it. And really is another principle for us to learn. It never works well, it never ends well when one tries to appease a bully. The only way is to push back and bear the consequences of that. And that's what strong leaders do. Strong leaders don't take anything from their enemy. They push back. And whatever it takes, they will not be bullied by the enemy. And they will not cave into the enemy's demands. Because once the enemy's got that hook in you, he'll use it for his advantage, and he'll take you out and destroy you. So Hezekiah's nemesis, really, in all of this at his time, is Sennacherib. And Sennacherib at the time of Hezekiah is the king of Assyria. We have a relief here of a picture of that particular time. There's lots of these reliefs that you can see, particularly in the Israeli Museum if you go in there. So they attack, the king of Assyria is going to come and attack the fortified cities of Judah. One of those cities that they come against is Lachish. And at one time, one of my trips to Israel, had the great fortune of being able to go to that site. Now it's not a first-class archaeological site in terms of the work that's been done and allowing tourists to go there. The time I went, it was pretty plain, but it was so fascinating to see and to picture King Sennacherib coming and the people in Lachish and the fortress there. And so Hezekiah was attacked by Assyria, or the attack came, obviously wasn't successful, but in 701 BC, we mentioned that earlier, and we find that people were led into captivity at that point. Many of the leaders were tortured. They resettled, those that had been tortured and taken out later resettled in Babylon, and from there they returned back. That was much later. But Lachish was an important strategic town because it protected the approach to Jerusalem. And so again, we have evidence of these depicted on the walls of Sennacherib's palace. And these reliefs show the looting that was in the city. And basically the defenders of Lachish were being shown, they were thrown over the ramparts, literally, and impaled. So they also had their throats cut while asking for mercy. So the Assyrians were very brutal in how they treated their enemy. Now, if we go over to 2 Chronicles 32, there's a lot of information there about Hezekiah, and we find things like he fortified existing walls of Jerusalem, he constructed towers, and he also blocked the spring. So the Gihon spring was basically outside the city. And he had to do whatever he could to block that water supply to the enemy, but at the same time bring the water supply in for the people. And this is Hezekiah, one of the main things that he did is that he channeled the water inside the wall from the Gihon down to the pool of Shiloach. Again, water is absolutely critical. Can't function without it. It's a critical issue for the people. So again, he needed to deprive the enemy of water, and he needed to provide the folks with the water they needed. At this point, everything had been very much weakened and broken down under his father Ahaz, so he had to rebuild everything. As I mentioned, he fortifies the city walls and protects the water supply and digs this tunnel, famously known as Hezekiah's Tunnel, from the Gihon down to the pool of Shiloach, all in anticipation of the threat that was to come. This tunnel is truly an amazing feat. As you can see, it is not a straight line. And they didn't have, well, maybe they did, but it didn't seem they had the engineering ability that we do today. But somehow they were able to, one start at one end and one's at the other, and they met in the middle, and they went through. Now, what could have been just 1,000 feet long turned into be 1,700 feet long. This is not a straight line, and it's basically constructed through solid rock. Now, there are many questions on how he constructed the tunnel, and how he made the pool and the conduit that went between the two. But he was responsible then for channeling that water between the Gihon and the Shiloach. Now, eventually, when we get to the 1st century, the entire water system is called the Shiloach. They don't really mention the Gihon anymore, the entire system from the Gihon down. So I'd like to just read something here. This was an inscription that was found in 1880. A boy who was bathing in a pool of Siloam, Shiloach, found this inscription. It's quite interesting. And this is the story of the piercing through. Well, each towards his fellow, and while there were yet 3 cubits to be pierced through, the voice of a man calling to his fellow, for there was a crevice on the right. And on the day of the piercing through, the stone cutters struck through each to meet his fellow axes against axe, and then ran the water from the spring to the pool, some 1,200 cubits, and 100 cubits was the height of the rock above the head of the stone cutters. And so there is great debate on how on earth they constructed this tunnel through this rock. The main theory that's been put forth is, did they simply enlarge what was already there? Was there already a natural channel there and that was created by water, and so did they just follow the course of that channel? Now, in reading some of the information recently, some believe that the tunneling was guided by acoustic communications from the surface. And so they were using a hammer, in a sense, from the surface, and it would send an acoustic message down to the tunnel, between the tunnel and the surface. And so it mentions in this particular inscription something about an overburden. So the overburden, it appears, was well beyond the sound communication. So it most likely meant that they had to change course in order to meet the team. So the inscription talks about the height of the rock being 100 cubits. So it was clear they knew the distance from the top to the surface, to the bottom there. So it seems likely they had to reroute their position in order to meet the group from the other end. So it's quite remarkable that they were able to use those acoustic methods in order to dig the tunnel. Again, it was not a straight line. It was 1,700 feet in a kind of a curvy serpentine motion. So this was one of the main preparations that Hezekiah made in order to prevent the attack against Jerusalem. And Sennacherib, king of Assyria, was the one who was planning this attack, and he was quite confident that Assyria could take out Judah, the king of Judah, and Jerusalem. And one of the reasons he thought so, he believed that Judah was now in a weakened state. And that was because Israel was no longer there to act as a buffer between Assyria and Judah. So remember, Israel had been taken out, and she had been scattered to the four corners of the Assyrian Empire. So there was nobody, in a sense, to run interference for Judah. It was just kind of, she was exposed. And so King Sennacherib felt that Hezekiah was very weak, and this was the time in which he was going to attack. And this is an interesting principle for us, because when we look weak, that is the time that the enemy will attack us. And even though Hezekiah looked weak, he was anything but. He had been making all those preparations. He did everything that he could do. The main preparation that he made was the spiritual preparation for the people. I believe that was the most significant thing. So the enemy looks at that, in this case Sennacherib, as thinking that this is this weak, helpless Judah. Israel's gone, there's nobody to defend them, and now's the time to take them out. But yet, the first thing Hezekiah does is restore the worship in the temple. And he made the nation spiritually strong, and the enemy was routed. So the enemy thought he could take him out. However, we'll find as we go through the story, God turned the tables. So I think it's a great principle in our own lives. We should always turn to God first. We should always prepare ourselves in that way in terms of worship and study, etc. And so the enemy may think we're weak, but they'll find out differently. So one of the things, as the Assyrians began to employ various tactics against Judah, we have information there in the scriptures about the structure of the Assyrian command. And one of the first mentions Tartan. He's the commander-in-chief of the army. We have another guy, Rav Sarim, who is the high military official, and then Rav Sheki, who is some sort of high civil dignitary. These are the main guys that Sennacherib has set up, and they're the ones that their strategy is to take out Judah. These guys were all what we would call experts in psychological warfare. And this is the kind of thing that they used against Hezekiah and his people. This is psychological warfare, a very convenient and a tool of the enemy that's always used. The battle, if you will, is pretty well always takes place in the mind. One of the things that the enemy will try to do is make you think things are much worse than they were. Again, in the case of Hezekiah, it would appear that he looked weak. However, the king Sennacherib thought he could take him out, but he wasn't because of his strength in the spiritual preparation. But again, the battle is in the mind, and the enemy will come against you, make you feel helpless and hopeless, and give you the impression that he's going to take you out. So let's just look at this passage here in 2 Corinthians 10:5. It says, "We demolish arguments and every arrogance that raises itself up against the knowledge of God. We take every thought and make it obey the Messiah." So we take every thought captive, because you know full well all our battles start here. And these are the battles at the end, the tactics that the enemy will use to bring confusion now in the larger arena historically, but also to bring doubt into the mind. So going back to Hezekiah, he's fortified the city, and in the same way we have to fortify our minds. And really the only way you can do that is with the scriptures. There's no other way really to fortify the mind, again, taking every thought captive. Now, the field commander brought a message from Sennacherib and told the people of Judah that Hezekiah was deceiving them. So in part of that deception, they were saying that God could not deliver them from Assyria. So that's the message that's coming down from Sennacherib. God cannot deliver you. And is that not the message that the enemy always gives us? God cannot deliver you. And he went along with that and listed off all the various gods that had been swept away by Sennacherib. One of the things they did was they refused to hold any kind of private talks with Hezekiah's cabinet. So there was no effort there to bring about a resolve to this situation, because that certainly wasn't Sennacherib's intent. One of the things they did, these three guys that were working under Sennacherib, was to play on the fears of the people, and they did that by speaking Hebrew. Now, the diplomatic language of the day was Aramaic, but the intimate, personal language of the people was Hebrew, and so he used their prayer language, if you will, against them. And of course, that's another thing that the enemy will come in and do in our prayer time, is to use all that in a way. They'll find a way to use that against us. However, Isaiah the prophet comes to Hezekiah and tells him and assures him that the city would be delivered. It would be saved from the Assyrians. And so because of Hezekiah's decisive and confident leadership, he reacts to that and pushes back Assyria, and he takes back some ground. And again, in our own lives, there's no place for compromise. Once you do, the enemy's got that ground and you'll never get it back. So you can't concede or compromise. The key, spiritually and physically, remains draw near to God for strength, whether in the physical or spiritual realm or wherever you find yourself. Now, I'd like to just, this is called the Taylor Prism. It's a little hexagonal clay prism, and on it are inscribed the 8 campaigns of Sennacherib. Now, this thing is only 15 inches high, and it seems like it'd be a lot bigger than that. 15 inches isn't very big, but he managed to inscribe his 8 campaigns, that is Sennacherib, on this little on this prism here. This was discovered in the ruins of Nineveh around 1830, and the dating that's on this prism here goes back from about 690, and it lists all the various states that Sennacherib besieged, the 46 strong walled cities and the innumerable small villages. And one of the things that it says on this, it says, I shut up Hezekiah, like a caged bird within Jerusalem. Now we find Hezekiah intercedes on behalf of this nation. Isaiah's prophecy is fulfilled and Jerusalem saved. So that's the reality. And we know that during the night, the angel of the Lord came and slayed 185,000. And it was the true historical account. Sennacherib, whatever destruction befell his army, he saw that destruction. He withdrew to Nineveh, and he was later killed by the sword by his own children. However, the Assyrians were notoriously bad at reporting what actually happened. So they were propagandists. They were very good at the truth being distorted for their own means. So it tells us that as for Hezekiah, the awful splendor of my lordship overwhelmed him, and the troops he brought in to strengthen Jerusalem. And he obtained protection together with 30 talents of gold and 300 talents of silver and all kinds of valuable treasures. Sennacherib, on the other hand, declared that Jerusalem had surrendered. Now, Hezekiah apparently did give large quantities of money as tribute to the Assyrians at one point. But the records, the Taylor Prism shows that the Assyrians returned home victorious, which we know was not accurate. And again, their records are notoriously unreliable. In fact, on the Taylor Prism, it says that the Assyrian army never lost a battle, which that was not accurate. And in this case, Jerusalem was actually victorious. And this can be corroborated by Herodotus, the Greek historian, and also Josephus, the Jewish historian. So there were a variety of theories on the deaths of the 185,000, and Herodotus claimed that it perhaps was a plague of rodents or that had disabled the weapons. Some say it was pestilence of some kind or cholera because there was a lack of good drinking water, but the reality is we don't really know. So again, there are a variety of ideas about what caused this the death of 185,000. Of course, the angel of the Lord came and slew them. That's what we have in the scriptures, and there are backup ideas on what happened there. But ultimately, Sennacherib fled. Something happened. His army was routed, and he hightailed it back to Nineveh. And in Nineveh, he was killed by his own sons. So that was the truth of what happened. And again, on that prism that we found that has been uncovered, he pretty well lied about everything that happened. Again, that he had won all his campaigns, etc. So this distorting of the truth is nothing new. We find that strong men often do that, and manipulate the truth, and they're very good, again, at propaganda. So I'm going to close out this session with this, and as we pick it up next time, we're going to go into a little more detail about some of the tactics that the enemy has used in this regard. So it's very interesting, and it's to pattern these two things, the history and the scriptures. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Again, I would encourage you to go back and read the scriptures to get the backdrop to it. And so we'll see you next time. Shalom.
Want more Dinah Dye? Get her 4-part series, Rapture or Bust, now on DVD at HebraicRootsNetwork.com.